My name's Dan. I've been a ranger out here in the Smokies for about 12 years now. I thought I'd seen it all. You get the lost hikers, the folks who twist an ankle 2 miles from the trailhead, the occasional black bear getting into someone's cooler. Routine stuff. But there was one summer, about 4 years ago, that still keeps me up at night. It started with a call about a missing man. His name was David. He was a school teacher from Ohio, came down here every year for a solo hike. He was one of those guys who knew what he was doing. Packed light, had good boots, carried a map. He was supposed to do the 20-mile loop from the ranger station up to the old fire tower and back. He checked in on a Tuesday morning. By Friday night, he hadn't shown up at the pickup point, and his wife was calling us frantic. We started the search Saturday at dawn. It was me, my partner Sam, and a few volunteers. The weather was clear, which was a blessing. We took the main trail up, calling his name every few hundred yards. We got to the fire tower by noon. No sign of him. His gear wasn't there. No footprint, no trash, nothing. That's when we decided to take the side trails. There's a bunch of old logging roads and unofficial paths that cut off the main loop. A lot of them aren't even on the newer maps. If you don't know what you're looking for, you can walk right past them. I figured maybe he took one of those by mistake, thinking it was a shortcut. We split up. I took the old Mossy Ridge Trail. It's a path that hasn't been maintained in decades. The forest just sort of swallows it up. You have to push through mountain laurel and rhododendron the whole way. It's hard going. I was about an hour down that trail when I found his water bottle. It was just sitting there on a rock, like he'd set it down and forgot it, half full. That's when my gut started to turn. A guy like David doesn't just leave his water. I radioed Sam and told him I had something. He said he was coming my way. I kept moving forward, slower now, looking at the ground. The trail was just a thin line of dirt under the leaves. Then I saw something else. A boot print. It was fresh, the edges of the print still sharp. I followed it. The trail started to get weird. The forest got quieter. You know how it is in the woods. There's always noise. Birds, bugs, wind. But back there, it was just dead silent. I stopped calling his name because it felt wrong to break the quiet. I came to a small clearing. In the middle of it was a pile of rocks, not like a natural formation. Someone had stacked them, one on top of the other in a kind of pyramid. It was about 3 feet tall. David's backpack was leaning against it. I approached slowly. I called out, "David, Park Ranger, you okay?" No answer. I unclipped my radio again before I could call Sam. I saw the note. It was tucked under a rock at the base of the pyramid. It was a page torn from his trail map. The writing was shaky, like a doctor's prescription. It just said, "He said I had to leave my things. He said the trail is watching." I stood there for a minute, just looking at that note. I remember feeling cold, even though it was July and I was sweating through my uniform. I checked the backpack. His wallet was inside, his keys, his little camping stove. Everything was there, but there was no David, no phone, no knife. I heard Sam coming down the trail. He was crashing through the brush, calling my name. When he got to the clearing, he saw the look on my face. He asked what was wrong. I just handed him the note. We spent the next 6 hours searching a 3-mile radius around that clearing. We found more of those rock piles, 7 of them. They made a kind of path leading away from the main trail, deeper into a part of the forest that wasn't on any map. The trees got thicker, the ground got spongy.
Around 4 in the afternoon, we found his shirt. It was hanging on a branch, torn at the collar. Then we found his pants. They were lying on the ground, neatly folded, with his belt coiled on top like a snake. It was like he had just undressed and walked away. We called in the dogs after that. The canine unit came out. The dogs went crazy for about 20 minutes. They followed the scent from the clearing to the last rock pile, and then they stopped. They just sat down and started whimpering. The handler tried to get them to go forward, but they wouldn't move. They tucked their tails and just wanted to go back to the truck. We found David 3 days later. A couple of hikers on the main trail, miles away from where we were searching, reported a man standing at the edge of the woods just watching them. They said he was naked, just standing there, not moving. They took a picture from a distance. It was David. When we got to the spot, he was gone, but we found him an hour later. He was sitting at the base of a tree, about 100 yards off the trail. He was dressed again. His clothes were on backwards. His shirt was on inside out, buttoned wrong. His boots were on the wrong feet.
He was just sitting there, rocking back and forth. His eyes were open, but he wasn't seeing anything. I knelt down in front of him. I asked him if he was David. He stopped rocking. He turned his head and looked right at me. His mouth opened, but it wasn't him talking. It was a sound, a low sound that came from deep in his chest. It didn't sound human. It sounded like a growl that turned into a word. He said, "The trail is full." His eyes rolled back and he fell over. We got him to a hospital. They said he was severely dehydrated and malnourished. They said he had been out there for 5 days without food, but they couldn't explain the marks on his body. He had scratches all over his back. They weren't random. They were patterns, lines and circles, like some kind of symbol. The doctors thought it was self-inflicted, but the scratches were too deep, too precise. They were made by something with long, sharp nails, fingernails, but not human ones. David never spoke again, not one word. He just sits in a facility back in Ohio, staring at the wall. His wife said sometimes he wakes up screaming in the middle of the night, pointing at the window, but there's never anything there. I went back to that clearing a week later. I wanted to see the rock piles again. I wanted to see if there was something I missed. I followed the old mossy ridge trail, the same path I took that morning. When I got to the spot where the clearing was supposed to be, it was gone. There was no clearing. There were no rock piles. It was just thick forest, like no one had ever been there. I walked in circles for an hour, checking my GPS. I was standing exactly where the clearing had been, but there was nothing, just trees and leaves and silence. I don't go off the main trails anymore. When people ask me why, I tell them it's the rules, but the real reason is simpler. I don't want the trail to notice me. I don't want it to know my name, and I sure as hell don't want to find out what it does with the people it takes. Because whatever took David, it didn't just want his things, it wanted him. And I got the feeling that out there, on those old trails, it's still waiting for more.
My name is Mike. I worked at a small state park in the Florida Panhandle for about 8 years. It was mostly swamp and pine flats, not the kind of place tourists get excited about. I was the only ranger on duty most nights. My job was simple: lock the gates at sunset, make sure nobody was camping where they shouldn't be, and keep an eye on the nature center. It was quiet, too quiet sometimes. This happened in late October. The weather was starting to cool off, but the bugs were still bad. I was doing my final drive around the park before locking the main gate. It was about 7 o'clock, already dark. I had my truck window down, listening for anything out of place. That's when I saw the car. It was a silver sedan parked at the trailhead for the Cypress Loop. That trail was closed after dark. I pulled up behind it and turned on my spotlight. The car was empty. No tags on the dash, no parking pass. I got out and walked around it. The doors were unlocked. There was a purse on the passenger seat. I opened the door and looked inside. Wallet, phone, keys, everything was there. The wallet had a driver's license for a woman named Jennifer Cole. I called it in. Dispatch said there were no missing persons reports for that area. They told me to search the trailhead and see if I could find her. I grabbed my flashlight and my radio and started walking the Cypress Loop. It's a mile-long trail that goes out to a wooden boardwalk over a cypress swamp. The trees are huge, draped in Spanish moss. Even with a flashlight, it's dark, the kind of dark that feels thick. I walked about 10 minutes calling her name. "Jennifer, park ranger, you need to come back to the parking lot." No answer. I got to the boardwalk. The swamp was still. No crickets, no frogs, just silence. That's when I noticed something on the boardwalk. It was a shoe, a woman's running shoe. It was standing upright, perfectly placed in the middle of the planks. I looked over the railing into the water. Nothing. I kept going. The boardwalk makes a loop out over the water and comes back to the trail. About halfway around, I found her jacket. It was draped over the railing like someone had hung it there to dry. I was getting a bad feeling. I radioed dispatch again and told them I might need backup. I finished the loop. No Jennifer. I went back to the parking lot. Her car was still there. I sat in my truck for a while waiting for the county sheriff to show up. About 20 minutes later, I saw headlights coming down the main road. I got out to wave them down.
But it wasn't the sheriff. It was an old pickup truck, rusted out, with a single light bar on the roof. It pulled up next to me. The driver got out. He was an older guy, maybe 60, wearing dirty jeans and a flannel shirt. He looked like a local. He said, "You looking for the girl?" I asked who he was. He said his name was Earl. He lived about 5 miles down the road. He said he saw the car when he was driving by earlier. Then he pointed toward the trail. "She went in there about 2 hours ago. She ain't come out." I asked him if he saw her leave the trail. He shook his head. He said, "I saw her go in, then I saw something else come out." I asked him what he meant. He just stared at the trailhead for a long moment. Then he said, "There's things in these woods that ain't on your maps, things that have been here longer than the park. They get curious when folks come in after dark." I didn't have time for local ghost stories. I told him to wait by his truck while I waited for the sheriff. He nodded and leaned against his tailgate. The sheriff got there about 10 minutes later. His name was Deputy Collins. We worked together before. I told him what I found. He agreed we should do another sweep of the trail, this time with more lights. We walked the Cypress Loop again. Me, Collins, and Earl followed behind us, even though I told him to stay put. We found the shoe, we found the jacket, then we found the other shoe, about 50 feet past the boardwalk, on the trail. It was also standing upright, facing back toward the parking lot. Collins started to get spooked. He kept shining his light into the trees, his hand on his gun. We got to the end of the trail without finding her. We were about to turn back when Earl stopped. He was staring at a patch of palmettos off the side of the trail. He said, "There." I pointed my flashlight. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I saw it, a shape. It was crouched down behind the palmettos. It was pale white, like a dead fish belly. It was about the size of a person, but the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long. The The legs were bent at angles that didn't look right. I shouted, "Jennifer!"
The shape moved. It uncurled itself and stood up. It was not Jennifer. It was too tall. It had to be over 7 feet. It stood there for a second, and then it stepped sideways into the trees. It didn't walk. It moved like a spider, all limbs, disappearing into the dark without making a sound. Collins drew his gun. Earl grabbed his arm and pulled it down. Earl whispered, "Don't shoot it. You'll just make it mad." I radioed for more units. We backed out of the trail slowly, keeping our lights on the spot where the thing had been. When we got to the parking lot, there were 3 more sheriff's cars. They set up a perimeter. They brought in a drone with a thermal camera. They flew that drone over the swamp for 2 hours. They found nothing. No heat signature. No sign of Jennifer. The next morning, they found her. She was sitting on a bench at the trailhead. She was wearing her clothes, but they were soaked. Her hair was wet. She was staring straight ahead, not moving. Her lips were blue. Her skin was cold to the touch, but she was alive. An ambulance took her to the hospital. They treated her for hypothermia. She didn't speak for 3 days. When she finally did, she told the doctors she didn't remember anything. She said she walked the trail, sat down on the boardwalk to look at the stars, and then woke up in the hospital. But I saw something different. When I went to visit her to get her statement for my report, I noticed her hands. Her fingernails were broken and dirty. There was dirt caked under them, like she had been digging. Her arms had long scratches, thin and parallel, running from her wrists to her elbows. I asked her if she knew how she got those scratches. She looked at her arms like she had never seen them before. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were empty. She said, "I was under the water, but I was breathing." I asked her what she meant. She just shook her head and started crying. I left her alone. I went back to the park that evening. I walked the Cypress Loop one more time in daylight. The boardwalk was normal. The swamp was full of birds and turtles. It looked peaceful. But I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Under the boardwalk, tied to one of the pilings, was a bundle of sticks. It was tied with what looked like old fishing line. It had feathers woven into it. It was crude but deliberate. I reached down and pulled it up. Inside the bundle was a piece of cloth. It was torn from a shirt, and wrapped in the cloth was a tooth, a human tooth. I took it to the sheriff. They sent it to the lab. It came back as a match to a missing woman from 3 years ago, a hiker who disappeared on that same trail. Her body was never found. I don't work nights anymore. I transferred to a different park, one with open fields and no swamps. But sometimes I think about that thing we saw in the woods, the one with the long arms. I think about how it moved. I think about how it took Jennifer and brought her back. And I wonder why it let her go. Because the way Earl talked about it, those things don't usually give people back. They keep them under the water, where they can still breathe.
My name is Tom. I was a ranger at a national monument out in Utah for 6 years. It's a big canyon system, miles from anything. The nearest town is 2 hours away. During the summer, we get tourists. During the winter, it's just me and the rocks. I liked the quiet. I liked being alone. That was my mistake. This happened in January. The park was closed to the public because of ice on the roads. I stayed in the ranger cabin near the south rim. My job was to check the facilities once a day and make sure no one had broken in.
Easy work. Most days I didn't see another person. One morning I got a call from dispatch. A woman had called 911 from a cell phone somewhere inside the park. The call dropped before they could get her location. Dispatch asked me to drive the main road and see if I could find her. I grabbed my coat and got in the truck. It was cold. The road was a sheet of ice in some places. I drove slow, watching both sides of the canyon rim. I drove about 15 miles before I saw a car pulled off at an overlook. It was a small sedan with out-of-state plates. The driver's door was open. The engine was still running. I pulled up behind it and got out. I called out, "Hello, this is the Ranger. Are you okay?" No answer. I walked up to the car. The heater was on full blast. There was a purse on the passenger seat. A phone was on the floorboard, screen cracked. No sign of the driver. I looked out over the rim. There's a trail that goes down into the canyon from that overlook. It's a steep trail, not maintained in winter. I saw footprints in the snow leading from the car to the trailhead. They went down. I radioed dispatch and told them I was going to follow the trail. They said they'd send help from the county, but it would be hours. I told them I couldn't wait. It was below freezing. If she was down there without a coat, she wouldn't last long. I grabbed my pack, a flashlight, and a rope. I started down the trail. The footprints were easy to follow. They went down the switchbacks, over the icy rocks. I moved fast, slipping a few times. The canyon walls got taller. The light started to fade, even though it was only mid-afternoon. The sun drops fast down there. About an hour down, I found her jacket. It was lying on a rock. I stopped and looked around. The footprints continued, but now they were spaced farther apart, like she had started running. I called her name again. Nothing. I kept going. The trail got narrower. The walls on either side were so close I could touch them. The footprints went around a bend and then stopped. Just stopped, like she had vanished into the rock. I stood there for a minute, confused. There was no side trail, no crevice she could have slipped into, just the canyon walls and the trail. I looked up. The walls were sheer, maybe 100 feet high. No way she climbed out. That's when I heard it. A voice coming from the wall. It was a woman's voice, muffled like she was talking through a door. She said, "Help me, please, I can't get out." I pressed my ear against the rock. The voice was coming from inside. I stepped back and looked at the wall. There was a crack, maybe a foot wide, hidden in the shadow. It looked like a natural split in the sandstone. I shined my flashlight into it. The crack went back about 10 feet and then opened up. I could see a small chamber, and I could see a hand. The hand was reaching out from the dark. It was pale, fingers curled. I shouted, "I'm a park ranger. I'm going to get you out. Just stay calm." I tried to squeeze into the crack. It was tight. I had to turn sideways and suck in my stomach. My jacket got stuck. I took it off and pushed through. I got to the opening and pulled myself into the chamber. It was a small space, maybe 8 feet across. The walls were smooth, like water had carved them over thousands of years. The sand was the floor, and there was a woman.
She was sitting against the far wall. She was wearing jeans and a thin sweater. Her arms were wrapped around her knees. Her hair was matted with dirt. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wide. She said, "He said he would come back. He never came back." I knelt down next to her. I asked her who. She just shook her head. I checked her for injuries. She was cold but not frozen. Her hands were scratched up, like she had been trying to climb the walls. I told her we had to move. I gave her my coat and helped her to her feet. As she stood up, I saw something behind her. There were drawings on the wall, carvings scratched into the sandstone, stick figures, dozens of them. Some were standing, some were lying down. One was much larger than the others, with long arms reaching out. I asked her if she made those. She said no. She said they were already there when she woke up. I asked her how she got into the chamber. She said she didn't remember. She said she was driving, and then she woke up in the dark. She said there was a man. He talked to her through the crack. He told her to be quiet. He told her he would bring her water. He came back twice, then he stopped coming. I got her out of the crack and back onto the trail. The sun was almost gone. I knew we couldn't make it back up in the dark. I radioed dispatch and told them I had her. They said the county rescue team was at the trailhead. They were going to lower a basket. We waited at the bottom. I built a small fire against a rock to keep her warm. She didn't talk much. She just stared at the canyon walls. Every few minutes, she would flinch, like she heard something. The rescue team got to us around midnight. They put her in a harness and hauled her up. I came up after. When I got to the top, the paramedics were checking her out. A deputy was taking her statement. I stood by my truck, drinking coffee. That's when the deputy came over. He said she told him a man had taken her, a man who lived in the canyon. She said he knew the trails better than anyone. He would come out at night and watch the overlooks. He waited for people to be alone. The deputy said they found something in her car, a note. It was written on a piece of paper bag. It was tucked under her windshield wiper. It said, "You were lucky. The others didn't scream loud enough." I asked him what that meant. He said they were going to search the canyon in the morning.
They searched for 3 days. They found 3 more chambers. In each one there were more carvings on the walls, more stick figures. And in the deepest chamber, the one farthest from any trail, they found a man. He was dead. He had been dead for a long time. He was sitting against the wall, his legs crossed, his arms hanging at his sides. He was wearing old Kansas pants and a flannel shirt. He had a beard down to his chest. A hunting knife was on the ground next to him. But he didn't starve. He didn't freeze. The medical examiner said his neck was broken. They said it looked like he had fallen. But the chamber was a dead end. There was nowhere to fall from. The drawings on the walls of that chamber were different. They were all of the same thing, a man with long arms, the same figure I saw in the first chamber. But in this one, the figure was standing over the stick figures, and the stick figures were all lying down. They never figured out who the dead man was. No ID, no records. He had been living in the canyon for years, maybe decades. They think he was the one who took those women. They think he carved those drawings, but they don't know who killed him or what. The woman I rescued, she spent 2 weeks in the hospital. When she got out, she came back to the park. She wanted to thank me. She looked better. She had color in her face. She shook my hand and thanked me for finding her. But as she was leaving, she stopped. She looked out over the canyon. She said, "The man in the chamber, he told me something before I blacked out. He said the canyon was hungry. He said he was just feeding it." I asked her what he meant. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "The drawings on the wall, the big one with the long arms, he didn't make those. He told me they were already there. He said they told him what to do." I quit that job 2 months later. I moved back east. I don't go near canyons anymore. I don't even like looking at pictures of them, because every time I do, I think about those drawings, and I wonder if the thing that killed that man is still down there,
waiting for the next person to come along, waiting to be fed. My name is Jake. I work for the Forest Service up in the Cascades. It's a big stretch of woods in Washington, nothing but Douglas fir and mountain trails for miles. I was stationed at a remote ranger cabin near a river called Lost Creek. It was a one-man post. The nearest paved road was 45 minutes away. I liked it that way. I liked the quiet. At least, I used to. I got the assignment because the previous ranger at that station had disappeared. His name was Bill. He was a veteran, been doing the job for 20 years. One day he just didn't check in. They searched for 2 weeks, never found him. They figured he fell in the river or got turned around in a storm. They posted the job, and I took it. I needed the experience. The cabin was small. One room with a cot, a wood stove, and a radio. There was a shed out back with tools and supplies. My job was to patrol the trails, maintain the signage, and report any fires. In the summer, I'd see hikers. In the fall, hunters. But when I arrived in late September, the season was winding down. The tourists were gone. The leaves were starting to turn. The first week was fine. I did my patrols, fixed a few fence posts, cleared some fallen branches off the trails. But on the third night, I noticed something strange. I had left a pair of work boots outside the cabin door to dry. In the morning, they were gone. I looked around. They were on the roof, just sitting there, laces tied together, hooked over a shingle. I figured it was a prank. There were some hunters camped a few miles away. Maybe they got drunk and came by. I shook it off. A few days later, I was hiking the old Ridge Trail. It's a trail that hasn't been used in years. The Forest Service stopped maintaining it after a landslide took out a section. I was checking to see if any trees had fallen across the main trail when I noticed something off the path. A stack of rocks. A small cairn, like the kind hikers build to mark a route. I followed it. About 50 yards into the woods, I found another one, then another. They led me to a clearing. In the clearing was a structure made of branches and tarps, a makeshift shelter. Someone was living out there. I called out, "Forest Service, anybody here?" No answer. I walked up to the shelter and looked inside. There was a sleeping bag, some canned food, a fire pit with cold ash. But there was also a collection of things. Hiking boots, a camera, a water bottle, a backpack. All different brands, all different sizes. They were arranged in a neat row, like a display. I took a picture with my phone and went back to the cabin. I radioed my supervisor and told him I found a squatter camp. He said he'd send someone to check it out in a few days. He told me not to confront the person alone. I agreed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises outside, branches snapping, the sound of something moving around the cabin. I got up and looked out the window. I didn't see anything, but in the morning, I found footprints in the mud by the door. They were barefoot. The toes were long and the prints were deep, like whoever made them was standing there for a long time, just waiting. I reported it. My supervisor said to pack up and come out. He said he'd send a team to clear the camp. I told him I'd stay one more night and head out in the morning. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat by the window with my flashlight and my radio. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something on the roof, a dragging sound, like someone was crawling. Then a thud. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. There was a deer carcass on the ground in front of the cabin. It was fresh. The throat was cut, and sitting on top of it was one of my work boots, the one that had been on the roof. I slammed the door and locked it. I radioed for help. The signal was weak. I got through to dispatch, but they said it would be hours before anyone could reach me. I told them I had a problem. They asked what kind. I said I didn't know. I stayed in the cabin with the lights off. I could hear breathing outside. It was slow and deep. It moved from one side of the cabin to the other. I could hear fingers dragging along the wood siding.
I held my breath. The breathing stopped right outside the door. Then a voice said, "You're in my spot." I didn't answer. I heard footsteps walking away into the trees. At first light, I packed my truck. I was throwing my gear in the back when I saw something hanging from the shed door. It was a ranger hat, an old one, the kind they used before they switched to the baseball caps. It was stained and torn. I walked over and looked at it. There was a name stitched inside the band. Bill, the ranger who disappeared. I got in my truck and drove out. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway.
The search team went in 2 days later. I went with them. We found the shelter in the clearing. It was empty, but we found more than before. There was a pit behind the shelter covered with branches. We moved the branches. Inside were personal items, wallets, watches, a wedding ring, a pair of glasses, all from hikers who had been reported missing over the last 3 years. We found a trail leading away from the shelter. It went deeper into the woods to a spot where the ground was soft. There were graves, 9 of them, shallow graves, marked with sticks and rocks. The team called in the state police. They brought in dogs. The dogs tracked a scent from the graves to a ridge overlooking the cabin. Then, the trail went cold. They never found Bill, but they found his uniform. It was folded neatly on a rock near the ridge. The shirt was inside out. The pants were folded over the boots. All of it was clean, like it had been washed in the river and laid out to dry. I gave my statement to the police. I told them about the voice. I told them what it said. They asked if I thought it was Bill. I said I didn't know. They asked if I saw him. I said no. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't tell them that on the morning I drove out, I looked in my rearview mirror. I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, just before the road curved. It was a man. He was naked. His skin was gray, like bark. His hair was long and matted. He stood perfectly still, watching me leave. And he was smiling. A wide smile, with teeth that looked sharpened. I didn't tell them because I didn't want to sound crazy, but I know what I saw. The investigation went on for months. They identified the belongings. 8 of the 9 graves were matched to missing hikers. The 9th grave was empty. They dug it up. There was nothing inside, just a piece of paper, folded and sealed in a plastic bag. On the paper was a single sentence, written in pencil. It said, "The ranger stays." They never found Bill's body. They closed the case. They said he was likely the one living in the woods. They said he must have had some kind of breakdown. They said he was probably dead now from exposure or starvation. But I know different. I've been a ranger for 10 years now. I've worked in 4 different forests, and in every one I've heard the same stories from the old-timers. Stories about a man living in the deep woods, a man who wears no clothes, a man who takes things from campsites, a man who leaves gifts. They say he was a ranger once. They say he forgot his name. They say he lives in the places where the trails end. And they say that if you stay too long in his territory, he decides you belong to him. I don't go into the backcountry alone anymore. I don't stay in remote cabins. When people ask me why, I tell them I prefer the visitor centers. But the truth is simpler. I'm afraid that if I go back out there, I'll find that shelter again. And this time, I'll be the one lying in the grave with the sticks and rocks on top. And he'll be wearing my clothes, standing at the edge of the trees, waiting for the next ranger to show up.